Hey guys, tonight we begin with something gloriously unpleasant. Because why drift off to a story about castles or kings when you could instead nestle into bed and learn what it was really like to earn your living as a human blood buffet in the soggiest corners of 18th century England? You wake up in a hut that's less charming countryside cottage and more rotting shoebox glued together with damp hope. The thatch roof has leaked again. Big surprise. And the straw mattress beneath you smells like wet wool and yesterday's regrets. Your legs ache, your ankles itch, and somewhere beneath the layers of cold mud and itchy wool, your soul whispers, not again. Because, yes, again. You're a leech collector. You roll out of bed and your feet sink into the earthen floor, which is less floor and more, slightly less wet mud. The sun hasn't risen, but you have. The swamps won't wait. You throw on your layers, wool tunic still damp from yesterday's adventure, threadbare stockings held together with more prayer than stitching, and a hat that smells like both mildew and mildew's more ambitious cousin. Outside, it's the kind of morning that makes your joints reconsider their contract. Fog clings to the marshes like a bad decision. The air smells of peat, brine, and somewhere in the distance, cow. Always cow. The ground squelches beneath your boots, which, by the way, are only boots in the philosophical sense. What you really have is leather vaguely shaped into something that might have once repelled moisture. Might. You make your way to the leaching spot, your office, as you like to call it, mostly to make yourself feel better. It's a shallow, stagnant pond on the edge of a village too small to appear on maps and too proud to admit it's mostly swamp. The water sits still, brown and glassy, with suspicious bubbles that indicate life or decay. Sometimes both. You stand at the edge and let out a sigh that only someone about to step voluntarily into parasite soup can produce. Then you hike up your skirts. Yes, skirts. Many leech collectors are women. And why not? You're underpaid, underappreciated, and constantly soaked. It's practically a woman's job description in 18th century rural England. And here's the fun part. The leeches don't swim to bait. They like warmth, movement, blood. So you wade in, up to your knees, sometimes your thighs. The cold cuts through the fabric and straight into your bones like a gossiping ant with icy fingers. And you wait. You stand still while the leeches find you, first a tickle, then a pinch, then a slow, spreading warmth that's definitely your blood leaving you. You don't flinch. Flinching makes them fall off, and you need them to stay on, to gorge themselves, to fatten up for the doctors, who'll pay more for a juicy leech than a skinny one. Who knew the future of medicine required you to bleed before anyone else did? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing which marshes and time zones you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift slightly and feel a small tug. That's the third one now. One on the calf, one behind the knee, and another climbing up your shin like it's scaling Everest for glory. You grit your teeth and resist the urge to swat it away. Let them feast. Your suffering is their gain, and their gain is your payday. Historians still argue whether leech collectors were considered skilled laborers or simply unfortunate souls too stubborn to die. There's no diploma for standing in a pond while being drained like a wineskin, but there is demand. And in the 18th century, heroic medicine is all the rage. Doctors believe most illness is caused by bad humors. And what's the cure for bad humors? Why, bleeding you until you look like a ghost wearing boots. But not just any bleeding, controlled, delicate, medicinal bleeding with leeches, lots and lots of leeches. Quirky tidbit: the best leech collectors aren't always adults. Children are sent into the water too. Why? Because they're small, nimble, and don't yet know enough to scream about it. In some villages, families raise kids like they're apprentice hors d'oeuvres. It's called generational trauma, or Tuesday. You pull out a small tin container, unscrew the top with numb fingers, and gently pluck the plumpest leech from your leg. It squelches into the can, still full of your blood and squirming like it's auditioning for a horror play. You smile. That one will fetch a good price. Maybe enough for bread, maybe even cheese. As the fog lifts and the sun makes a shy appearance over the hills, you take stock of your haul. Not bad. Your legs are cold, bleeding, and covered in angry red rings. But there's a certain pride in it. You've bled for your breakfast, and tomorrow some nobleman will bleed again, courtesy of your muddy sacrifice. You hobble out of the pond, legs numb, tin can sloshing like a very unfortunate cocktail shaker, and begin the slow walk home. The bites throb, your toes squish, but there's work to be done. You've got to sort, clean, and prep the leeches for market. You'll probably name a few of them out of boredom, and by tomorrow morning, you'll be right back here, standing still while your circulatory system gets remodeled by annelids. This is your life. This is leech collecting, and it's just getting started. You get home and immediately strip off the soggy layers, the wool peeling from your skin like damp wallpaper. Your legs look like a battlefield, red welts, fresh blood, and some bites already swelling up like you're allergic to your own job, which, let's be honest, you might be. The fire in your hearth has long gone out. You didn't have time or fuel to bank it last night, so you huddle near the ashes, shivering in your underlayers, which smell like wet dog, vinegar, and despair. Breakfast? If you're lucky, a heel of bread so hard it could qualify as a building material. If not, you chew on a boiled root and pretend it's soup. Now it's time to prep the tools. And when we say tools, what we really mean is a rusted tin can, a bit of mesh, and your own body. Because that's the big secret. The one no one likes to say out loud. You are the bait. You don't use meat. You don't use worms. You use you. Your legs, your arms, sometimes your face if you trip in the bog, which you've definitely done, and the leeches were delighted. Your container is a grimy tin cylinder, once meant for biscuits, but now forever stained by mud, swamp water, and small, writhing nightmares. The lid doesn't screw on quite right anymore, thanks to one overly ambitious leech that tried to escape and met its end in a very dramatic, flopping fashion on the kitchen floor. You still have nightmares about the sound it made, a moist slap, followed by your cat screaming. The mesh lid lets them breathe, but only just. Oxygen, it turns out, is critical when your cargo is dozens of aquatic vampires. If they suffocate, you lose money. If they escape, you lose sleep and potentially a few toes. There's something unsettling about waking up to find your own product halfway up your thigh, trying to freelance. You give the tin a shake. They wriggle. You nod. Still alive. Still disgusting. Quirky tidbit: some leech collectors added a little ale to their blood to get the leeches drunk. Drunk leeches supposedly let go easier, making them easier to harvest. The downside? You had to drink a bit first. So yes, There's a historical possibility that you are leeching, half tipsy and bleeding, like some kind of grotesque spa day gone wildly off the rails. Historians still argue whether this ale blood method was widespread or just the invention of one particularly inebriated leech woman from Yorkshire. Once the leeches are collected, you separate them by size. The plumper ones are premium, bloated, juicy, still glossy from feeding. The skinny ones, you'll try to fatten them up tomorrow. And the half dead ones go in a separate jar because sometimes doctors want less vigorous specimens for weaker patients, which frankly feels like a poetic insult. Here's a barely alive bloodsucker to help you not be barely alive. You wipe down the tin with a cloth that hasn't been cleaned since the Glorious Revolution, but it's the only one that doesn't trigger the leeches into a panic. Yes, they panic. They can sense warmth and movement. If you don't handle them just right, they squirm like they're trying to invent modern dance. And if they get out, good luck. One time, your cousin tripped and spilled her entire haul. 23 fully engorged leeches flopped across the floor like they were reenacting a horror version of synchronized swimming. It took 2 hours, 3 sticks, and a lot of screaming to round them all back up. She still gets twitchy around puddles. There's not much dignity in this job. You stink. You bleed. You're constantly explaining your profession to people who immediately take a step back. But it is work. And in a world where women are expected to be midwives, washerwomen, or basically invisible, you at least get to be seen, even if it's by accident, even if it's by leeches. You pack the tin into a wicker basket lined with hay and wrap it in a scarf to keep them from freezing or escaping, or both. Then it's time to walk to the apothecary in town. The walk is long, the mud is thick, and the judgmental looks start around mile 3. People know what you do. They smell it. They see the stains on your stockings, and some of them cross themselves when you pass, as if you might throw leeches at their faces like some kind of swamp witch. You don't blame them. You've considered doing it, especially to the baker who shortchanged you last week. Your boots slurp through the muck, each step a soggy protest. You arrive at the shop smelling like mildew and achievement. The apothecary eyes your tin like it's gold, which to him it is. Leeches sell well. His wealthy clients don't ask questions. They just want their humors balanced and their skin tone lightened. That's right, leeches are also used in cosmetic treatments, because nothing says beauty like bloodletting. You trade your haul for a few coins, far less than it's worth, and begin the slow walk home, tin empty, but legs full of fresh welts. Tonight, you'll warm some water over the hearth, not to wash, but to soak your feet. The relief is temporary. The bites will itch, swell, maybe get infected, but there's no alternative. This is the job. And tomorrow, it starts all over again. You, the bait, them, the bloodthirsty, and a marsh that never runs out of mud or misery. The marsh greets you like an old enemy with a bad attitude, always damp, always waiting, and never ever improving. You wake up sore and sticky, your legs wrapped in strips of cloth soaked through with whatever your skin is leaking this morning. Blood, pus, or yesterday's regrets. You've stopped asking. Today's assignment? A different pond. Your regular haunt has been picked clean. Too many collectors stomping around, ruining the ecosystem with their desperation. The leeches have either gone into hiding or overdosed on peasant blood. You need new ground, so you venture farther out, past the town, past the suspiciously still tree line, and into the lesser-known bogs, where the air is thicker and the frogs look at you like they're judging your life choices. This is the good part, finding the perfect leaching grounds. You prod the ground with a stick as you go, not to test its firmness, but to avoid sinking into surprise mud holes, or worse, into a cow grave. Yes, those happen. Bogs don't ask for permission before swallowing a wandering beast or person. You scout with the precision of someone who has learned the hard way that not all still water is friendly. The best leech ponds are calm, shallow, and have that faint greenish film on top, the kind that smells like swamp soup with a hint of expired lettuce. You know it's perfect because it makes you gag a little. Historians still argue whether these prime leech spots were privately owned or fair game. Some documents suggest village bylaws reserve certain bogs for certain families. Others imply it was a total free for all. First ankles in, first leeches won. You wade in cautiously. The mud sucks at your legs with a squelch that sounds almost personal. It wants you to stay, to become one with the bog. But you've learned to dance with it. Short steps, even weight, and no sudden movements, unless you enjoy the experience of one boot getting swallowed whole and having to fish it out with a stick and a mild existential crisis. This new pond is promising. It has that ideal balance of grossness and biological activity. You see bubbles, you see movement, you feel something slither past your calf and decide not to think about it. You plant your feet and stand still. The water creeps higher than you'd like. You pretend not to notice. You tell yourself the leeches will come quicker if you stay calm. You are the bait. You are the warmth. You are, oh, yep, one just latched on. Welcome to the party. Quirky fact, some collectors whispered to the leeches. Seriously, they believed leeches could sense intent, and if you were kind, gentle even, they'd behave better. So you mumble under your breath. Easy now, one at a time. No biting above the knees today, please. This doesn't always work, especially with the bold ones that mistake your thigh for a buffet centerpiece. The bites start multiplying. They love the warmth behind your knees, the insides of your calves, the soft bits you never knew were soft until a leech made it its personal playground. You endure. You have to. If you swat one away prematurely, it dies from starvation or shock, and then it's worthless. Doctors want full ones, happy ones, plump ones. You begin a mental checklist. 1, 2, 5, maybe 8. Hard to say. Some are under the waterline, hidden in your stockings, slurping away like it's bottomless brunch. And here's the kicker. You can't feel them all. Leeches inject a numbing agent when they bite. It's their way of saying, shh, don't ruin this for both of us. So for the next hour, you just stand there. You zone out. You think about dinner. About maybe buying soap next month. About the time a goose chased you into a ditch and you lost a whole day's worth of leeches. Good times. The sun creeps higher. The air warms slightly, enough to make the water tolerable in a still smells like rotting algae kind of way. You hum a little just to keep your brain from sliding into the same mush as your feet. And eventually, when you've counted enough tugs and wriggles to be satisfied, you begin the removal. This is an art. You can't just rip them off. That causes tearing, bleeding, and sometimes the mouth parts stay in, causing infection. So you gently coax them with a fingernail, or sprinkle a bit of salt if they're particularly clingy. That's the nuclear option. You prefer diplomacy. You pluck each one with care, placing them into your tin with a practiced flick. They squirm in protest. You tell them, look, I don't like it either, and screw the lid shut. It's a good haul, a great haul. Your legs look like they've hosted a party for 12 very rude worms, but that's just part of the deal. You step out of the pond, legs heavy, blood trickling in lines down your shins. You swat at a mosquito that dares to join in, late, offended by its timing. Back on dry land, you rest, just for a moment. You lay in the grass, tin in your lap, and stare up at the gray English sky like it owes you an explanation. You wonder what it's like to have a job that doesn't involve bleeding. Then you stand up, wipe your hands on your apron, and begin the walk home, squelching, limping, and counting every step toward a halfpenny at the market. Tomorrow, you'll try the northern bog. The frogs there are friendlier, allegedly. You get used to being wet, not just a little damp, like a light drizzle on laundry day. No, you are wet to the soul, perma wet, damp in places you forgot had nerves. The kind of wet that lives in your boots and behind your ears. The kind that seeps into your clothing, your bedding, your very identity. If you were a coat of arms, it would just be a moldy sock on a brown field. Today, you're dressing for another fine English morning, which means overcast, cold, and deeply aggressively moist. The kind of day that feels like the entire sky is gently sneezing on you for 6 hours straight. Your outfit is the same as yesterday and the day before. A woolen tunic with too many patches and not enough dignity. Long stockings, one of which has been darned so many times it's more thread than original fabric. An apron that's stiff with salt from dried swamp water and dried blood. Mostly yours. Fashionable? No. Functional? Also no. But it's what you've got. The thing about wool is that it absorbs water like a sponge, but dries, like it has performance anxiety. Once soaked, it stays soaked, heavy, itchy, and hanging off your shoulders like a wet dog that's decided to cosplay as a shirt. You think about those wealthy ladies in town with their silks and parasols. You wonder if they'd last 5 minutes in the bog. You'd give them 3, tops. You try wrapping yourself in oilskin once. A friend swears by it, but all it does is trap your own sweat, so you end up soaked anyway, just more self-generated. Quirky tidbit? Some Leech collectors swore by wearing skirts instead of trousers. Easier to rinse, easier to hitch up in the water, and leeches had fewer places to hide. Of course, you also flashed every frog in the marsh, but modesty takes a back seat when your income depends on how easily your blood can be accessed. Historians still debate whether this clothing choice was strategic or simply due to limited options. The 18th century didn't exactly offer Gore-Tex or fleece-lined anything. Most peasants wore what they inherited, found, or stitched together from whatever didn't smell too much like goat. Your hat, if you're lucky enough to own one, is made of felt and shaped like something between a collapsed mushroom and a grumpy cake. It keeps the worst of the drizzle off your face, and it's the closest thing you have to privacy. Boots are optional, mostly because good ones are rare and expensive. You wear wooden clogs today, lined with straw and hope. They creak when you walk and squeal when you step into the marsh, as if they're protesting their life choices right alongside you. You step into the bog and feel the water rush in. No matter how tight you lace or wrap or pray, the marsh always finds its way in. It's cold. Every time. Even in summer. You wonder if the water is just personally offended by your optimism. You think of the apothecary again, the way he smirks as he hands you a single coin for a tin full of leeches, then sells each one for 10 times That to some desperate doctor who thinks bleeding a man will cure his toothache. You mutter, maybe Leech, the dentist, instead next time, and smile at the thought. Then your smile fades as another leech latches onto your inner thigh. Of course it does. They always go for the soft, tender spots. There's no winning. You shift your weight, letting the cold soak in deeper, because maybe if you're already numb, the bites won't feel like tiny syringes filled with betrayal. A ripple on the water. A frog leaps across your boot. You jump and nearly fall, and for a split second, you wonder if this is the day you just give up and become a part of the swamp ecosystem. Maybe the frogs will hold a tiny funeral. Maybe the leeches will attend out of guilt. Probably not. You focus. You've been out here an hour. You can feel at least 7 attached. That's a decent haul. You tell yourself if you get 10, you'll head home early. Maybe make a stew. Maybe stare into the fire and try not to think about how many of your socks now have bloodstains that will never ever come out. You reach down, gently feeling along your calf. Yep, 2 big ones. One on the ankle, slightly drunk with your blood and swaying like it's had a long night. Another between your toes. Charming. You pluck them one by one, placing them into your tin, which now makes a low, wet squelching sound when you shake it. It's oddly satisfying. Gross, but satisfying. Like collecting rain in a bucket, only the rain has teeth. You wipe your hands on your apron, adding a new layer to the crusty collage of stains and smells. You're starting to smell like a bog witch, or maybe a very confident mushroom. The weight of the tin feels good in your hands. Heavy, hopeful, money, medicine, misery, all in one container. You step out of the water, boots farting with every squelch, and feel the cold air lick at your wet clothes. You brace for the wind. It always comes when you're half soaked and vulnerable. Like nature has a sense of comedic timing. But still, you walk through the reeds, past the duck pond, past the old willow tree where someone once swore they saw a ghost, and you believe them because honestly, who wouldn't haunt this place? You walk toward home, a tin full of leeches, a heart full of complaints, and legs that look like they've hosted a mosquito reunion party. Tomorrow, you'll wear the same clothes. Because what's the point of washing something that's just going to get re-swamped? You hum a tune to yourself. Something old, something wet, something sung only by people who know what it's like to have your job and still get up and do it again. By now, the leeches know you. Not by name, of course. They're not that clever, but in a way that feels intimate, familiar, like an unspoken agreement between parasite and provider. You give them a meal, and well, they give you back your own blood, slightly warmer, and considerably itchier. Today you're feeling it, the fatigue, the way your legs pulse with that raw, dull ache that says, you've bled too much this week. The way every step feels like you're carrying buckets of cold stew strapped to your knees. You should probably rest, but resting doesn't feed you. Resting doesn't impress the apothecary. And resting sure doesn't stop the leeches from finding someone else to chew on. So you go, again, into the same marsh, through the same reeds, into the same brackish water that seems to exhale when you step in, as if it's sighing, you again. But there's something worse than the cold water or the smell of pond rot in your socks. The pain of being popular. It starts with one, just a little tickle on the calf. You tell yourself you can handle it, that you're used to it. But then another joins in, and another. And then suddenly it's like your legs have been invited to a surprise party thrown by a dozen hungry worms with teeth. You clench your fists and try to stand still, because swatting at them would only cause more problems. The trick is not to react, not to move, not to scream when one finds that sweet spot right behind your kneecap and settles in like it's booked a 5 night stay with breakfast included. Some of them bite, feed, and fall off like rude dinner guests. Others cling longer, burrowing their little sucker mouths into your skin like they're writing love letters in red ink. And it's not just the pain, it's the weirdness of it. The tugging, the pulsing, the knowledge that something small and slimy is actively siphoning your life force while you hum to keep your sanity. Some people find it poetic. Those people don't do this for a living. Quirky tidbit, there were tales of leeches that grew so fat on human blood they'd explode if plucked too roughly. You've never seen it happen, but you have seen one slip out of a tin and burst open on the floor when it hit a rock. It smelled like iron and swamp tea. You didn't eat dinner that night. Historians still argue whether the sheer number of leeches a collector endured daily could lead to long-term anemia. You don't need their opinion, you just need a mirror. Your skin has gone from peasant beige to a chic, translucent gray. Your nails are pale. Your eyes have the haunted glaze of someone who's been bitten in the same place 3 times in a week and no longer believes in mercy. Some collectors, mostly the old timers, brag about their tolerance. 50 bites a day, never flinched once, they'll say, lifting their skirts to reveal legs that look like angry turnips. You try not to laugh. You admire them, sort of. But also, you wonder if they're just too far gone to care anymore. Today, you're pushing 20. Bites, not years. You stand waist deep in water, the cold creeping into places you refuse to name, and feel the weight of every leech feeding like a drumbeat under your skin. It's not unbearable, but it's not nothing. You keep thinking about how doctors see these leeches as miracles, how they store them in crystal jars in clean rooms, using them for everything from headaches to hysteria. They treat leeches like mystical tools of science. If only they knew the reality. A woman knee-deep in slime, muttering curses in 3 dialects while being slowly drained by swamp noodles. You whisper to the leeches again, not out of superstition, just habit. That's enough now, you murmur. Let go nicely, and I won't salt you. And weirdly, some do, as if they understand, as if they're full and satisfied, and floating away like lazy little blimps. You reach down, plucking them gently, trying not to disturb the ones still working. You've learned that if you're careful, you can double your haul in one sitting. But if you panic, if you flinch, or shiver, or fall, chaos. Bloody chaos. One slips from your fingers and plops into the water, vanishing like a soggy ghost. You curse under your breath and move on. There's always another one, somewhere under your skirt, probably. You check your tin, half full, sloshing gently. That's the sound of income, of a meal, of another day's survival. Your hands shake slightly as you snap the lid shut. From cold? Maybe. From blood loss? Also maybe. But mostly from sheer effort. Holding still while being chewed alive requires more strength than anyone gives you credit for. You finally step out, squelching and sore. You wring out your apron and shake your arms like a dog coming in from the rain. You're covered in bites, mud, and the scent of water that hasn't moved in 100 years. But you've done it. Another morning. Another harvest. Tomorrow you'll do it again, because you are a leech collector. And for better or worse, the leeches love you. You'd think that after so many mornings spent being chewed on by thumb sized vampires, your enthusiasm would wane, and you'd be right. But then you remember something. People are paying good money for these slimy freeloaders. Not you money, mind you, but apothecary money, which, by the time it trickles down to you, is just enough to not die. Yet, today you're headed into town with a particularly bloated batch. Your tin is heavy, sloshing and squirming like a portable horror show. It's your ticket to a few coins and maybe, a stale apple from the market if you can haggle aggressively enough. The dirt road is still damp from last night's rain, which means every step is a splash, every wheel groove, a puddle of mystery. You hold the tin close to your chest, both for warmth and to keep curious fingers away. Children stare. One even asks, "Miss, can I see the wigglers?" You shake your head. He doesn't need that kind of trauma. You reach the apothecary. He stands behind the counter in a coat that smells of spice and arrogance. His shop is filled with shelves of bottles, powders, dried roots, and things that look suspiciously like eyeballs floating in brandy. You'd ask, but you stopped asking questions here after the third time someone referred to mummy powder with a straight face. He greets you with a nod, already eyeing your tin like a banker eyeing a debtor, with just enough coins to make things mildly interesting. You unscrew the lid, and the leeches squirm for freedom. He leans in, makes a pleased grunt, and begins his little performance. He pokes, prods, lifts one with silver tongs like he's inspecting art. Mmm, he mutters. Healthy, fat, no bite scars. He sounds impressed. You sound silent, mostly because you're too cold to speak and too tired to waste words on someone who's about to underpay you. Quirky tidbit: some wealthier physicians started keeping leech jars in their homes, delicate glass containers, like aquariums, where they'd keep leeches on display. Like bloodthirsty bonsai trees, conversation pieces with a side of slow medical torture. Historians still debate whether these were purely decorative or if it was just one more way to flex wealth, like saying, "I don't need to go to the swamp, I keep my parasites domestically." The apothecary offers you 4 coins. You blink. 4? Come now, he says. This one's sluggish. He lifts a particularly bloated specimen that is, yes, slightly lazy, but also clearly bursting with your blood. You want to argue that it's just digesting and that maybe he's sluggish, but you don't. Instead, you sigh and accept the coins. You leave the shop with your empty tin and your not even enough for butter pocket money. Outside, a man is coughing violently into a handkerchief. You wonder if he's headed inside to buy one of your leeches. You think, poor soul. Then you think, maybe charge him double. You trudge through the square, past the stalls with wilting vegetables and the fishmonger shouting about his fresh eels, which are clearly on day 3 of reconsidering life. The smell is overpowering: salt scales and the gentle whiff of dishonesty. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a window pane, mud spattered skirt, boots caked in something that may or may not be algae, hair frizzed like a broom in protest. You look every inch the leech collector, and not in a glamorous way. If fashion were honesty, you'd be on the cover of Swamp Vogue. You buy a small roll from the baker, who makes a face as you hand over your coins. Bit of a smell today, he mutters. You smile sweetly and say, "Don't worry, it's just success," before walking off and leaving him confused and slightly repulsed. By the time you return home, the sun is starting to fade. You sit by the hearth, rubbing your aching legs and thinking of tomorrow. Another day of standing still, being nibbled alive, and trading blood for bread. You wonder what it must feel like to have a profession with clean hands, or dry socks, or a schedule that doesn't depend on whether amphibians look optimistic. But no, you are in demand. Leech medicine is everywhere, used for headaches, infections, hysteria, gout, indigestion, and general 18th century gloom. To the medical men, they're miracles. To you, they're meal tickets with teeth. And yet, there's a strange pride in it. You know things about the water, the seasons, the best times to collect. You know the difference between a lazy leech and a lively one. You can spot a good pond from a quarter mile just by sniffing the breeze. You may be poor, soaked, and bitten, but you are an expert, a professional, an unlicensed practitioner of bog economics. You stoke the fire, set your tin by the hearth to dry, and pull your stockings down to inspect the bites. They're red, swollen, angry, much like you, but you survived the day. And that, in your world, is a win. The townsfolk don't like you much. Oh, they'll take your leeches, sure. They'll buy them from the apothecary, whisper about how miraculous they are, how they saved so and so from a nasty fever, or helped old Mrs. Biddle finally stop seeing ghosts. But they don't like you. You're the weird one, the one who spends hours knee deep in frog soup, harvesting creatures that drink blood and don't even say thank you. When you pass through the village, people tend to part like you're carrying a contagious idea. Children are warned not to stare. Dogs bark. Cats flee. Even the geese seem to squint at you with suspicion, as if you're plotting something unnatural, which, to be fair, isn't totally inaccurate. You are plotting how to get 12 more leeches out of a half-dead pond before your legs turn blue. Some call you swamp hag. Others whisper blood wife. A few say it with admiration. Most say it with garlic tucked in their pockets. Because local superstitions? Oh, they're thriving. Some believe that only witches can lure leeches, that you've made a pact with the spirits of the marsh, that every bite the leeches take is a curse placed on another soul. You're not just collecting, you're transferring. And if that's true, then you're the most efficient curse distributor this side of Yorkshire. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, it was believed that leech collectors could control the weather. Too many leeches this month? Drought next month. Too few? Expect floods. You once sneezed in the market square and 3 people crossed themselves. You coughed and someone moved house. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or just rural paranoia wrapped in boredom. But in places where science hasn't quite won the tug of war with folklore, it's safer to blame the nearest soggy woman with a tin of bloodsuckers. So, you've learned to walk a little quieter, to keep your eyes low, to smile less, because your smile, missing a few strategic teeth and framed by leech bites, tends to startle people. There was that one time you tried to explain the job to a curious visitor, some posh lady from London with gloves and opinions. She'd seen leeches used in her cousin's surgery and thought they were fascinating. You tried to tell her the reality, the cold, the mud, the daily bleeding. She blinked once, dropped her handkerchief, and promptly fainted. After that, you kept your explanations brief. Still, the whispers follow you. She talks to them. You know, I heard she's part leech herself. Her legs are all scars, all of them. You don't correct them. It's better this way. Let the fear do some of the heavy lifting. It makes the apothecary less likely to shortchange you, and it keeps the neighbor's children from nicking your laundry. It's not all bad. Some folks leave you small offerings, flowers, bread, even a carved charm, just in case the rumors are true, just in case you really can speak to the marsh. You never ask for gifts, but you never refuse them either. That would be rude, and rudeness gets you cursed, according to the logic of people who think everything with more than four legs is a sign from the devil. You once joked with a blacksmith that if the leeches didn't bring healing, they'd at least distract patients from how bad the medicine tasted. He didn't laugh. He just gave you a wide berth from then on and started referring to you as that iron willed woman of the wetlands. Not the worst nickname you've had. On the way home, you pause by a small shrine, just a weathered stump with ribbons tied to its branches. It's where villagers leave wishes. You tie a bit of thread to it. Not a prayer exactly, more like a resignation, a nod to the fact that your life is now forever entangled with mud, suspicion, and the occasional helpful parasite. You make it home and toss your boots aside. They land with a squish and a puff of steam. You sit slowly, unwrapping your legs to find fresh bites, still seeping, ringed with bruises. They throb in that familiar rhythm: sting, pulse, itch, regret. You clean them as best you can. Boiled water, a scrap of linen. You mutter to yourself, mostly for comfort. If I don't get swamp rot this year, I'm putting that on my gravestone. Outside, the frogs start their evening chorus. The marsh is alive, singing, and somewhere out there, more leeches are slithering through the muck, waiting for their favorite walking blood bag to return. That's you, by the way. You're the favorite. And tomorrow, you'll be back. The itching starts before you even get out of bed. At first, it's subtle, like the ghost of a mosquito that died with unfinished business. But then it builds, a steady crescendo of tingling, burning, and the unmistakable sensation of tiny invisible pitchforks being dragged across your skin. You groan, shift under the scratchy blanket, and consider whether today is the day you finally throw yourself into the marsh and ask the frogs to adopt you. You sit up and peel off the bandages from your legs. The leech bites have gone from mildly angry to full mutiny. Red rings surround each one, some crusted over, some still weeping. You dab at them with a vinegar-soaked rag, your own invention, half medicine, half punishment, and try not to scream. This is the price of being popular. Infection. See? The leeches themselves are relatively clean. It's the water that's the problem. The water, the mud, the invisible colonies of swamp bacteria waiting for a cozy wound to move into, like it's their summer rental. You limp across the room, each step accompanied by a squish, a wince, and a low mutter that could be either a prayer or a curse. You're not sure anymore. Probably both. Your hearth is cold. You stoke it slowly, adding kindling that smells like damp regret. The flames sputter to life, and you lower yourself into a stool that groans louder than you do. You prop up your leg and take a closer look at your left ankle. It's swollen, puffy, and has taken on a shade of pink, usually reserved for ham. This is not ideal. You know the signs: fever, swelling, that subtle creeping heat under the skin that says, hey, remember when you thought you could stand in stagnant water for 4 hours without consequences? Quirky tidbit. Some leech collectors believed that rubbing crushed mint leaves on their legs after collecting could ward off infection. Others used garlic. One woman swore by soaking her feet in sour ale every night. You've tried all three. They mostly just make your legs smell like a confused salad. Historians still argue whether these remedies had any effect or were just acts of desperation disguised as tradition. In your experience, Most medicine for the poor is basically cross your fingers and try not to die. But there is one trick you've picked up: a salve made from lard, soot, and boiled nettles. It doesn't heal the bites, exactly, but it makes the itching slightly less homicidal. You slather it on thick, wincing as the soot stings the open skin. And still, you prepare to go out, because the leeches won't collect themselves. Well, they might if they had ambition, but so far, they've shown no sign of entrepreneurship. It's always down to you. You wrap your legs in linen strips, cleanish ones this time, and slide your feet into your clogs, which now have straw padding that smells like wet horse. It's not a fashion statement, it's a survival strategy. As you walk, the pain throbs with each step like a drumbeat. You tell yourself this is normal, that it'll ease up once the water numbs your legs. You tell yourself many things: that the swelling isn't that bad, that people have survived worse, that your shin probably won't fall off. The marsh is quiet today. Even the frogs seem subdued. You squint at the sky. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's you. Maybe they're finally tired of your constant muttering and the leech's melodramatic exits from your tin. You wade in slowly, trying not to hiss as the cold water hits your bites. It burns, then it numbs, then it burns again. You breathe through it. You've gotten good at reading the water, where it pools deepest, where the weeds are thickest, where the leeches are laziest. You find your spot, plant your feet, and wait. A ripple, a bite, another. You stop counting after 6. The pain is dulled by the cold and your own stubborn refusal to acknowledge it. You hum a little song your mother used to sing while gutting fish, something cheerful and entirely unrelated to your current situation. And as you stand there, bleeding into the swamp like some kind of oddly serene human teabag, you think about other people's jobs. The baker gets to smell warm bread. The cooper gets to make barrels, which frankly are never rude or bitey. Even the rat catcher gets to chase something that doesn't actively try to nurse from his shins. But you are the blood buffet. You stay until you feel woozy. Then you gather your haul, place them into the tin, and drag yourself back to dry land. You collapse under a tree, leg throbbing, vision blurry. You know this could be bad. If the swelling spreads, you'll be too slow tomorrow. If fever sets in, you won't be able to stand, and if you can't stand, well, you're no good to the leeches then. Still, you manage a weak smile as one particularly fat leech tries to escape the tin and face plants on your apron instead. You flick it back in with a finger and whisper, "Nice try, worm." Because even on your worst days, bitten, limping, bleeding, and itchy beyond belief, you're still the best leech collector this bog has ever seen. And as far as leg infections go, well, you've had worse. You're not the only one in this game. There are others, fellow collectors, rivals, sometimes even friends if the weather's kind and the leeches are plentiful. But don't be fooled. This is not a team sport. It's leeching. And out here in the marshes, where the ground squelches and every stick might be a snake or someone's last boot, things can get territorial. You first noticed it when you found muddy footprints leading into your pond. Not just any pond, the good one. The one where the leeches grow thick and slow and fat like marsh sausages. Someone had been there. Recently, the reeds were trampled. The water had that stirred up look, like it had secrets to confess. And worst of all, there were no bites that day. You returned home with an empty tin and a head full of curses. Because yes, rival collectors are a real problem, especially during peak season When demand is high and supplies run thin, everyone's desperate, and desperate people with sticks and too many bug bites make for volatile company. You learned the hard way. There was that day you arrived at the marsh only to find Agnes, sour faced Agnes with the elbows of a prizefighter, already knee deep and whistling like she owned the place. She smiled at you, but her eyes said, I will bury you in reeds and not feel bad about it. You tried a different spot, but the leeches weren't biting, so you tried to wait her out. 2 hours later, you were still standing, your legs blue, and she was casually humming a tune while plucking leeches off like grapes. Eventually, you caved and asked, Done yet? She smiled sweetly and said, Almost. She wasn't. She stayed another hour, just to make sure you got nothing. Quirky tidbit: some collectors were known to sabotage each other, rubbing ash into ponds to scare the leeches away, or even tossing in scraps of raw meat to change their feeding habits. One old man allegedly poured vinegar into an entire bog just to throw off the competition. The leeches hated it. The frogs filed a complaint. The man was banned from the market for a week, which in leech collector terms is a full economic collapse. Historians still argue whether these turf wars were localized squabbles or if certain regions had full blown leech syndicates. You wouldn't be surprised. The way Martha guards her southern bog, you'd think it contained gold instead of glorified medical tapeworms. The collectors have an unspoken code. Don't step into another's pond without asking. Don't sell to their apothecary unless you want to find your tin mysteriously full of pond rocks. And if someone saves you from sinking in quick mud, you owe them a favor, usually in the form of letting them harvest the good spot next Thursday. You try to play fair. You really do. But when your legs are sore, and your bites are infected, and your stomach's growling louder than the frogs, ethics start to feel negotiable. One time, you arrive before dawn to stake your claim, only to find young Thomas already thigh deep and grinning like a swamp gremlin. Didn't think you'd be out this early, he said. You didn't answer. You just stood 2 feet away from him in the same pond, both of you refusing to move, like two very damp chess pieces waiting for someone to blink. You got 5 leeches that day. He got 4. You called it a draw. He called it character building. Some days, the competition gets less passive aggressive and more active aggressive. You've been shoved, sworn at. One woman tried to slap a leech onto your face once, yelling something about, "This'll teach you to poach my bog." You ducked. She fell in. The leech survived. Since then, you've carried a stick, not to hit with, unless truly necessary, but to mark your territory. A quick X in the mud, a reed tied with cloth, subtle warnings that say, "This is mine, move along." It doesn't always work, but it gives you a little peace of mind. You also started naming your favorite spots. The Shin Pit, Leech Lagoon, Old Faithful. That one always delivers. A little cold, a little slimy, but full of the clingy little beasts that make your life marginally survivable. The camaraderie among collectors is complicated. You share a trade, a smell, a mutual understanding that your job is both ridiculous and weirdly noble. But trust? That's harder to come by. You talk sometimes, exchange tips, complain about market prices, swap stories about that time a goose chased you into a ditch and you dropped your tin, but no one tells anyone their best spot. That's sacred, because in the end, this is leech collecting. And in leech collecting, it's every soggy, blood-speckled soul for themselves. Tomorrow, you'll head out again. Earlier this time, just to beat Martha, just to reclaim your patch, because out here, the marsh doesn't care who you are, but the leeches, they remember. You try to sleep. Really, you do. But your legs have other ideas. They burn, they pulse, they itch in patterns so precise, you wonder if the leeches are trying to communicate through Morse code. You scratch, you swat, you apply more of your nettle lard goo. It helps about as much as praying to the god of soggy underthings. Your bed is a pile of straw stuffed into a sack, laid across two uneven planks. It smells faintly of mildew, heavily of sweat, and unfortunately of marsh. Everything you own smells like marsh, including your dreams. Tonight, your legs are the enemy. Itch and bleed repeat, like a sad little lullaby, sung by mosquitoes. You lie there, shifting one way, then the other, then back again, because one of the bites just burst and you're now bleeding into your only blanket. You sigh, out loud, to no one, because this is just another part of your glamorous profession. You'd love to scratch, but you know the rules. Scratch and you bleed more. Bleed more and the wounds won't close. Wounds don't close, and next thing you know, you're hobbling through town looking like a human bandage, and the baker's kids start asking if you're part ghost. So instead, you tap gently around the bites, whisper curses into the night, and contemplate sleeping sitting up again. And even if you do fall asleep, your body doesn't let you forget. You wake up to sharp little stabs, phantom bites. Your nervous system, bless it, has developed a kind of leech PTSD. It now assumes anything below the knee is under attack at all times. Quirky tidbit: some leech collectors used to sleep standing up, leaning against door frames to avoid pressure on their bites. Others slept with their legs hanging off the bed, hoping gravity would prevent nighttime bleeding. You've tried both. You've also tried sleeping in the tin. Not literally, but spiritually. Historians still debate whether these nocturnal struggles were ever recorded seriously, but of course they weren't. What scribe wants to waste ink on how often a leech collector has to change their bandages at midnight? Eventually you doze off, only to be woken by that feeling. That damp, slithering, squishy feeling. You sit bolt upright, light a stub of candle, and spot it. One escapee. A leech, half dried, trying to make its way across your floorboards like a squishy little outlaw. You groan, grab it with a cloth, and toss it back into the tin. Nice try, you whisper, before checking the lid 3 times. You fall back into bed, limbs heavy, eyelids heavier, and finally slip into something resembling rest until morning, when your legs are stiff, your back hurts, and the straw has migrated to places straw should not be. You groan, sit up, and look down. Bloodstains, again. You sigh and begin the routine. A rinse of the legs in lukewarm water that smells like yesterday. A new set of bandages, if you can find any clean cloth. Breakfast is a crust of bread and whatever dignity you haven't yet bled into your socks. And then, back to the bog. You pack your tin. Still stained, still dented, still loyal. You check your clogs. One is slightly cracked. You consider fixing it. Then you consider how much you hate everything. And then you don't fix it. The walk is quieter than usual. Your joints ache more today. Probably the cold. Probably the swamp. Probably the long list of minor injuries you've collected, like souvenirs from a very ill-advised vacation. You pass other collectors on the road. No one waves. One nods. That's the most affection you'll get this week. At the marsh, you go through the ritual, the testing of the ground, the cautious wade, the settling in. You feel the first bite almost immediately, and here you are again, a leech collector. A walking, talking, bleeding buffet. And this time, you're doing it all with one boot that squeaks, bandages soaked in yesterday's mistakes, and about 3 hours of half sleep punctuated by slippery nightmares. Still, you stand. Still, you collect. Because no matter how much it sucks, and let's be honest, it really, really does, it's a job. And in 18th century England, that's more than most people have. There's a rustling in the reeds behind you. You freeze, partly out of instinct, partly because your calves are already numb and the act of turning too quickly might cause an embarrassing and muddy collapse. You hear another rustle, followed by a wet squish. Not frog, not bird, definitely not wind. Then you hear the unmistakable squelch of boots. You sigh. Another collector. It's Harold. You can tell by the shape of his shadow and the slightly wheezy cadence of his breath, like a blacksmith's. Bellows trying to sing. He's trudging in from the south side of the pond. Your side. You marked this spot yesterday with a bundle of twine tied around a stick. That's the agreed signal. He ignored it. Morning, he grunts. You grunt back. Barely. Because this is not a friendly hello. This is a territorial standoff. The marsh doesn't care for these, but humans can be very particular about where they bleed. You pretend to not mind. That's strategy. If he thinks you're relaxed, maybe he'll move. But Harold is like a barnacle with eyebrows. Once he's attached, he's not going anywhere. You both stand, ankle deep, in the same general area, not talking, not moving, just bleeding in parallel. It's awkward, like sharing a dinner table with someone who stole your chair and insists the food tastes better from that side. The leeches aren't biting as well today. Maybe it's the tension. Maybe they sense the competitive energy. Or maybe they're just tired of your shins. You wouldn't blame them. Harold pulls up a fat one, smirks at you like he's just invented boots, and drops it in his tin with a smug plop. You respond by adjusting your stance and letting two slide down your leg into your palm. You don't smile. You just exist, loudly. Then it gets worse. Turf wars. Not swords and shields. This isn't a Shakespearean tragedy. It's sticks and swamp insults. Last week, Marjorie tripped over Agnes's fishing pole and nearly impaled herself on a driftwood stump. Agnes swore it was an accident. Marjorie swore in 3 languages and hasn't returned since. You've heard rumors of collectors sabotaging each other's tins, releasing leeches in the night, replacing them with slugs, or worse, slipping in a frog for fun. It's chaos disguised as commerce. Quirky tidbit, there were actual reports from local magistrates, tiny footnotes in dusty ledgers about disputes among blood gatherers. Some towns tried to regulate leech collecting, licenses, permits, designated bog hours. These rules were, of course, ignored completely. Historians still argue whether these attempts were sincere or just a bureaucrat's way of saying, we don't know what to do with you people. You do remember one girl, Elspeth, who brought her geese with her into the bog. They'd honk ferociously at anyone approaching, like feathery sentinels of the marsh. People mocked her until one of the geese bit a rival collector. After that, no one laughed, except the goose. You don't have geese. You have sarcasm and a mildly sharp stick. Back in the marsh, Harold finally leaves, muttering something about the water being off. You don't reply. You just breathe easier. You collect 5 more leeches in peace. The sun climbs a little higher. The water warms slightly, just enough for your toes to remember what sensation is. You move upstream to a small bend in the reeds where the water thickens into a sluggish green. It's quiet. Perfect. You step in, slowly, gently. That's when you feel it. Not a leech, but a hand on your shoulder. You almost leap out of your skin. It's Thomas. Young, eager, too many teeth for one mouth. Didn't mean to scare you, he says, clearly proud that he did. You sigh again. You're standing in my shadow, you say. He blinks. Is that a collector saying? You blink back. No, just go stand somewhere else. He does, eventually, but only after asking how the leeches are biting, whether you've heard about the apothecary's new assistant, and whether you think the frogs in the east pond are cursed. You answer none of these. When he finally waddles off, you take a deep breath. This job isn't just water and bites, it's navigation of swamp politics, of slippery alliances, of people who think respecting leaching boundaries is a suggestion rather than a law. But you're still standing, still catching more than Harold, still outlasting Agnes, still avoiding goose related trauma. In the hierarchy of leech collectors, you may not be the queen, but you're definitely not in the mud. Well, technically you are, but you're there on your own terms. Rain, because of course there's rain. It doesn't fall so much as seep, like the sky has sprung 1,000 tiny leaks and can't be bothered to fix any of them. It's not dramatic, not cinematic, just endless, slow, gray wetness soaking everything in its path, including your socks, especially your socks. Today's forecast soaked to the soul with a high chance of grumbling. You shuffle along the road to the marsh with your hood pulled low and your tin knocking against your hip, echoing a rhythm that feels far too chipper for the situation. Every step is a splatter. Every gust of wind finds the one gap in your cloak and worms its way to your ribs. And the worst part? The leeches love it. Rain wakes them up, makes them lively, feisty, bouncy even. You once saw one leap. It hit your shin with the enthusiasm of a toddler spotting cake. As you approach the marsh, you find it transformed. Puddles have merged into mini lakes. The ground squelches so aggressively, it might qualify as a form of protest. Reeds wave back and forth like they're whispering secrets about you. You mutter to yourself as you wade in. It's fine. Just a little drizzle. Just nature's way of making sure your clothes never dry. Who needs comfort anyway? The water is higher than usual. It sloshes up to your thighs with alarming speed. You imagine a fish bumping your leg and whisper, "Don't you dare." Visibility is low. Mist curls along the surface like the breath of some sleepy, bored god. But you know this marsh. You could navigate it blindfolded, which honestly wouldn't make much difference at this point. You find a good spot and settle in, feeling the familiar tug of leeches waking up and clocking in for their shift. One latches on with gusto, then another, then three in a row, like they've organized into a queue system. Quirky tidbit: in heavy rain, leeches sometimes migrate en masse, tiny parades of slime across grass and dirt, heading toward higher ground or warmer prey. A traveler once claimed he saw thousands crossing a path and had to turn back. Historians still argue whether this was true or just a dramatic retelling from a man who really hated worms. You, unfortunately, know it's true. You've stepped in one of those parades. It was slippery. You try to focus, breathe slowly, become one with the bog. The rain makes it harder. It drums on your hood, your tin, your exposed forehead, a steady percussion of inconvenience. Your clothes cling tighter, heavy with wet fabric. Your apron smells like pond stew. You don't want to think about what's crawling inside your left boot. Suddenly, a gust of wind blows your hood back. Rain pelts your face with the grace of thrown pebbles. You sigh, tilt your head up, and mutter, "Very funny." There's no reply, which is rude, considering how much time you've spent talking to this marsh. Your hands tremble slightly from the cold. You count the bites by feel: four on your right leg, two on your left thigh, one sneaky one on your hip. That one's ambitious. You could leave, but today's haul is promising. The leeches are feeding fast and fat. You imagine the apothecary's smug little face twisting into reluctant approval. You imagine coins, maybe enough for soap and a boiled turnip, so you stay. The wind picks up. A branch snaps in the distance. You blink through the mist and spot a figure across the pond. Tall, hunched, moving slowly. Another collector? Hard to tell. Maybe just someone with terrible life choices. You wave. They do not wave back. You lower your hand and pretend that didn't happen. It's one of those days where everything feels just a little eerie, like the air's thicker, like the marsh is watching you back. You hum, not because you're scared, just acoustically territorial. You start pulling leeches one by one gently into your tin. They wriggle and squirm, protesting like toddlers denied dessert. You whisper your usual threats: behave or I salt you. It seems to work. By the time you finish, your tin is almost full. Your legs are almost numb, and your will to be a leech collector is, well, damp. Permanently damp. You slog back to shore, clog squishing, cloak clinging, and water running down your spine like it's paying rent. You wring out your sleeves and wonder when exactly your life became a series of fungal risks. But the tin is heavy. That's what matters. You did your job. In the rain, in the cold, in the midst of whatever mild haunting is probably happening across the pond. You start the long walk home, dripping, shivering, and occasionally muttering things like, "I used to want to be a baker." At least bakers are dry. You don't talk about it often, but you remember when you started. Not the first day. No, that's a blur of biting, mud, and the realization that leeches don't respect personal boundaries. But before that, before the bog, before the tin, before your legs looked like a failed map of Europe drawn in hives, you were just hungry. There weren't many options. No dowry, no family business to inherit, no charming voice for singing or steady hands for sewing. What you had were sturdy legs, a questionable tolerance for gross things, and the sort of desperate practicality that turns "I could never" into "I suppose I must." So, you took the tin, you stepped into the marsh, you let the first one bite, and you didn't cry much. It was horrible, but it was honest. You earned every coin through effort, pain, and the occasional involuntary yelp. And as you learned how to find them, how to remove them, how to not faint from blood loss, you realized something. There was power in this, not glory, not comfort, but knowing. You knew things other people didn't. You could read a ripple in the water. You could tell which plants meant shallow ground, which ones meant leeches. You knew which apothecaries were cheapskates and which midwives actually appreciated your work. You built your life around a tin full of teeth. And now you're one of the best. People won't say it out loud, of course. That would be too close to respect. But they glance at your tin when you pass. They talk in lowered voices about how you still have all your toes. They ask, carefully, which pond is doing best this season. They watch you. Today, you walk into town not just with a full tin, but with something bordering on pride. Your clogs are clean-ish, your bites are bandaged, and your posture says, "Yes, I voluntarily bleed for a living." What of it? You pass a young man selling fish. He nods. You nod back. Mutual understanding. Mutual smell. You pass the baker. He still flinches slightly when you approach, but you've stopped minding. You give him a coin, and this time, he adds a second roll without comment. Progress. You pass a gaggle of ladies in hats, chatting loudly about someone's rash. One of them gestures vaguely in your direction and says, "Ask her. She knows these things." You pause, eyebrow raised, and she backtracks immediately. "I mean, just in passing, of course." You say nothing. You just raise your roll and keep walking. Quirky tidbit: in some rural communities, leech collectors were quietly relied upon for more than just medical supply. They knew the wetlands, the weather, the water quality. They became accidental local experts, consulted for everything from fishing to childbirth. Not respected exactly, but needed. Historians still debate how much influence leech collectors held. Some argue they were little more than walking suppliers. Others suggest they were early folk healers, marsh wise women who understood more than the doctors who bought their stock. You wouldn't call yourself wise, but you do know how to tell if a bog is turning sour before it kills your best leech line. And that's something. As you reach the apothecary, he's already outside, broom in hand, swatting at invisible dust. He eyes your tin. "Decent haul." You pop the lid, squirming, wet, beautiful. He leans in. "Not bad. No split ones?" You shake your head. You'd never bring him a split one. That was your first and last mistake 2 years ago. The memory of his face still haunts your less proud moments. He counts them quickly, pulls out a pouch, and presses coins into your palm. More than usual. You blink. He shrugs. "Better than what I've seen lately." That's the closest thing to a compliment you'll ever get from him. You walk away, warm bread in one hand, slightly heavier pouch in the other, and a little less mud on your dignity. Sure, your legs still burn. Sure, your tin still smells like regret. But there's a kind of satisfaction in this grind, in surviving, in doing something no one else wants to do, and doing it well. Later, back home, you sit by the hearth. You eat your roll. You count your coins. You check your bites and whisper to the worst one, "Don't get infected, please." We've had this conversation. And as the fire crackles and your tin dries by the wall, you allow yourself a small smile. You're still here, still bleeding, still thriving, in your own strange, squishy way. It's market day, which means noise, crowds, spilled cabbage, and the subtle but persistent pressure to act like you're not the most blood-drained person within a 5-mile radius. You've scrubbed yourself more thoroughly than usual, hair braided back, apron washed, tin wiped down to something resembling clean adjacent. Even your socks match, a rare victory in the long, tragic war between laundry and leech-related time constraints. Because today isn't just about the haul. Today, the surgeon is in town, a real one, with a real coat and a real assistant who wears gloves and says things like, "Prepare the instruments," in a voice that suggests he's never touched anything that squelches. Surgeons are the big buyers. They pay more, they expect more, and they are entirely uninterested in your problems unless your problem happens to be an excess of healthy, energetic, bite-happy leeches. You walk into the square like a woman with purpose, which you are, except your purpose involves a container full of living medical tools that may or may not try to escape at any moment. You keep the lid on tight. The surgeon's stall is larger than most, complete with a canopy, an assistant with spectacles, and a table covered in jars of dubious fluids. You approach, tin in hand, heart thudding, slightly faster than you'd like to admit. He looks at you once, then the tin. Then he gestures. Let's see. You pop the lid. Immediately, three leeches try to make a break for it. Good vigor, the assistant says, nudging one back with a stick. They're lively. You suppress a smirk. You know, quirky tidbit. In 18th century England, leeches weren't just used by surgeons, they were brand names. Apothecaries often bragged about where their leeches came from. Staffordshire leeches, finest in the realm, or Bristol biters, twice the suck, half the mess. Some regions became known for producing leeches with exceptional stamina, though historians still debate whether this was based on fact or just early pharmaceutical marketing. The surgeon selects a few, examines them like fine jewelry. Excellent specimens, he murmurs. You nod, trying to appear casual, while also resisting the urge to wipe a bit of pond moss off your sleeve. He offers you a deal, double the usual price. Your fingers tighten slightly around the pouch of coins as he drops it into your palm. You give the smallest possible nod, a thank you, a business transaction, a silent scream of internal triumph. As you walk away, you hear the assistant say, I thought marsh collectors were unreliable. The surgeon replies, some are, but she's good. You don't turn around. You don't need to, because in a town full of skeptics and soggy boots, that's the closest thing to a standing ovation. You treat yourself to something extravagant, a boiled egg, still warm, still whole. You eat it sitting on the edge of the fountain, watching children toss pebbles and argue about who gets to pet the baker's dog. You think, just for a moment, about what your life might have been if you hadn't picked up that tin, if you'd gone into laundry, or fish gutting, or housemaid work, dry feet, predictable hours, fewer parasites. But then again, none of those jobs involve being the best at something people pretend not to need and yet absolutely do. You pack up, swing the tin to your hip, and start the walk home. Your path leads past the healer's hut. She waves you down. I've got a woman with liver problems, she says. You've got anything fresh? You nod, unhook the tin, and offer her a few of the smaller ones. Quick, efficient, eager feeders. She slips you a ribbon. For your hair, she says, to keep it out of your eyes. You blink, it's red, a bit faded, but intact. You haven't owned a ribbon in years. You tie it around your braid and walk on, tin lighter, heart oddly heavier. Because for all its rot, this job matters. You help heal people. You help keep things turning. You don't wear gloves, or get applause, or clean fingernails. But your leeches have saved lives. Your bites have bought bread. And for one strange, damp, squishy moment, you feel proud. There's a certain sound leeches make when they're happy. It's not a squeak or a chirp, nothing vocal, just that subtle, moist, squirming sound as they wriggle contentedly in their tin, full-bellied and half-dreaming of more ankles to nibble. You recognize it now, like a parent tuning into their baby's sighs. Except instead of a lullaby, it's more like someone stirring oatmeal with a wooden spoon. If oatmeal had teeth, you sit beside your tin, legs elevated, sipping weak tea. Your ankles are wrapped, your socks are drying on the hearth, and you've got time, a rare and precious resource in your line of work, because for once, you don't have to go to the bog today. You've collected well this week, sold to the apothecary, sold to the surgeon, even gave a few away to the healer's apprentice in exchange for a jar of honey and something vaguely herbal for your persistent swelling, which leaves you here, by the fire, listening to the rhythmic plops and shuffles of your Leech collection, wondering how the worms manage to live so simply: eat, float, cling, digest, repeat. There's a lesson in that, probably. You leaf through a battered book, someone left behind at the last market. Can't read half the words, but there's a sketch of a leech in the margins with a note: effective for toothache, gout, and melancholy. You snort. That about covers life, doesn't it? Quirky tidbit: leeches were often prescribed for emotional ailments. Feeling gloomy? Slap a leech on your temple. Heartbroken? Bloodletting might rebalance your humors. Historians still debate whether this was desperation, ritual, or just the 18th century version of, have you tried turning it off and on again? You tried one on your temple once, just to see. It didn't fix your sadness, but it did give you a solid reason to focus on something else for a few hours. Mainly, how hard it was to keep it from sliding into your ear. You glance toward the window. Outside, the marsh glistens, not quite inviting, but familiar. It's part of you now, like a very clingy relative that smells faintly of mildew and disappointment. You didn't plan on this life. No one does. You just adapt. You learn which bites heal fastest. You learn how to feel for a leech even when your feet have gone numb. You learn how to trade without being cheated, how to stand in the rain without flinching, how to bleed and not panic. You become part of the process, a conduit. The leeches may be the treatment, but you are the reason they're available at all. You are the sticky, soggy link between patient and healer. You are the unsung bog courier, hand delivering medicine straight from the swamp. You look down at your hands, scratched, stained, hardened from years of carrying tins and pulling clingy creatures from your own skin. You touch your braid, still tied with the red ribbon, a small kindness, a reminder that you're more than your profession, that someone noticed you outside the context of squelching, noises, and ankle wounds. There's a knock on the door. You creak it open to find Elsie, the midwife, standing in the drizzle. You've got any left? She asks. You do. She's got a sick child. Fever. No coin. You don't hesitate. You reach into the tin, pick the strongest one, not too fat, not too sluggish, and place it into a jar with a bit of marsh water. No charge, you say. Bring the jar back. She nods, blinking faster than the rain would justify. You're good, she says. You're really good. You close the door gently behind her. That night, the rain patters on the roof like a lazy lullaby. You sit by the fire, tin by your side, hands in your lap. You're not a doctor. You're not a hero. But somewhere tonight, a fever might break because of a leech you caught. And for now, that's enough. You knew this day would come. It starts like any other. The slow stretch of morning aches, the familiar clomp of clogs across warped floorboards, the tea so weak it might legally be considered water with aspirations. You go to check your bites as usual. Standard routine. Unwrap, wince, assess, rewrap. But this time, one doesn't look right. It's your right calf. The skin around the bite is red, but not the usual blotchy pink. This is angry, tight, glossy, swollen in that I'm about to do something dramatic kind of way. And it hurts. A deep pulsing ache, as though the leech left behind not just a bite, but a grudge. You prod the area. The pain bites back. You sit there for a moment, in your damp nightshirt, feeling equal parts offended and impressed. After all this time, after years of being bitten, bled, and battered by swamp things, your own body has finally decided to file a complaint. It was bound to happen. You try your usual fixes: vinegar rinse, nettle salve, muttering threats at your shin. Nothing helps. By midday, you can barely stand on it. Your leg has swollen to the size of a loaf of bread, and not the good kind, the lumpy kind, baked wrong and left too long near a radiator. You know what this means. You are now your own patient, and you know what your own trade demands in this situation: bloodletting. With leeches, the ultimate ironic punishment. It's like the leech gods are playing a long, slow joke, and you finally reach the punchline. You hobble to your tin, open it slowly, and stare down at your wiggling coworkers. Well, you mutter, one of you's about to get promoted. You pick one, slim, quick moving, a real go getter, not one of the lazy ones who takes ages to latch. This is serious. You sit by the hearth, wrap your skirt up to the thigh, and brace yourself. The leech latches fast. You flinch. Even after all these years, that first bite still triggers something primitive: a shiver down the spine, a twitch in the fingers, the deeply human realization that something is drinking you, and you're just letting it. Quirky tidbit: in moments like these, some leech collectors would sing to distract themselves, or recite prayers, or swear inventively into their aprons. You hum a marching tune you barely remember, something about potatoes and poor life choices. Historians still debate whether self treatment was common or just something desperate collectors did to avoid doctors' fees. Either way, it wasn't officially recommended. But when you are the supplier, options become flexible. You sit for 20 minutes. The leech gorges, bloats, and eventually detaches with a satisfied little plop. You clean the wound, wrap your leg again, and wait. You're exhausted, not just from the blood loss, but from the absurdity of it all. Here you are, bandaging your own leech bite with linen you bought by selling leeches to heal from a leech bite you got while collecting leeches. It's all very full circle. And honestly, you feel strangely proud. There's a sort of grim poetry in the fact that your tools have become your treatment, that the very thing that makes people recoil from you is also what might save your leg. You rest for the rest of the day, leg propped on a stool, sipping broth and glaring at your tin like a disappointed supervisor. They wriggle without guilt. Of course they do. They're leeches. Tomorrow, if the swelling's down, you'll go back out. If not, well, you've still got a few more options. You've seen this before. You've survived worse. And you've learned that in your trade, resilience matters more than comfort. You don't get days off. You get days out of the bog, out of options, out of your mind with frustration. But you always return. Always. Because if you don't, who will? You lie awake that night, staring at the ceiling. Rain taps gently on the thatch. The fire has long since settled into glowing embers, casting shadows that twitch and stretch across the floor like sleepy cats. Your leg, mercifully, has calmed. The swelling has gone down. The redness is fading. The leech did its job. It always surprises you a little, even now, that it works. All the ridicule, the looks, the muttered ughs from passing townsfolk. And yet, when someone's desperate, when the doctor's treatments have failed, or they can't afford a physician at all, they come to you. They always do. And you always have something wriggling and ready. Still, the question creeps in tonight, slower than the fog curling over the marsh. Are you helping? Or just enabling a bad habit? Because let's be honest, leeches aren't exactly cutting edge medicine. They're centuries old. The thinking is old. The science is hazy. And some of the so called cures you've heard border on swamp superstition. You remember a man once came to the marsh demanding 7 red bellied leeches for his wife's headaches. You explained gently that leeches don't have belly colors. He insisted. The red ones are for female ailments, he said confidently. You gave him 7 normal leeches. He thanked you. She apparently recovered. Make of that what you will. Quirky tidbit: in the 18th century, doctors believed in balancing the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much blood? Slap on a leech. Too melancholy? More leeches. Historians still argue whether leech therapy was effective treatment, placebo, or just very damp guesswork dressed in Latin. You've overheard debates in the apothecary shop, heated arguments over whether bloodletting helps with fevers, infections, or bad tempers. One man insisted leeches cured his arthritis. Another swore they caused his. You sit somewhere in the middle. You're not a scholar. You're not a healer. You're just someone who noticed that when people bleed a little, sometimes they feel better, and sometimes they don't. You recall Elspeth's sister came down with swelling in the joints. The doctor tried everything: herbs, poultices, prayers. Then he turned to leeches. 10 of them, spaced over 2 weeks. She improved. Not cured, but walking again. But then there was Timothy, the blacksmith's apprentice, a nasty infection on his arm. The doctor tried leeches too late. The arm went, and so did Timothy. You try not to think about that one too much. Tonight, though, you do, because you were the one who sold those leeches. It's strange, being a part of something without being in control of it. You're a cog, a quiet, muddy cog in a wheel spun by doctors, midwives, and desperate families. You provide the bloodsuckers. They decide where to put them, and if it goes well, great. If not, the leeches get blamed. Or the healer. Rarely you. But you wonder sometimes, how many of those people actually got better? You roll over, adjusting the blankets, listening to the steady drip drip of water off the roof. You think of how many leeches you've caught. Hundreds? Thousands? Enough to cover the walls, if you were the decorative sort. Enough to keep your rent paid. Your belly half full. Your life, such as it is, afloat. Still, something tugs at you. Not guilt exactly. More like unease. A question with no clear answer. Are you part of the cure, or just part of the system? The system that says, if you're poor, you bleed more. If you're sick, you pay with what little you have. And if you're lucky, a wriggling worm might make you feel just slightly less awful. You sigh deeply into the blanket. Because really, what choice do you have? You're not a physician. You're not trained. You're not educated beyond what the marsh has taught you, but you've survived this long by being needed. And right now, the world still needs leeches, so you'll keep collecting, keep bleeding, keep squinting through the gray lines between help and harm, because no matter how slippery the ethics get, no one else is willing to stand ankle deep in muck for hours, letting nature chew on them. No one but you. The seasons turn, and with them, the marsh. Summer's muggy embrace softens into the brittle chill of autumn. The reeds fade from green to gold. The frogs get quiet. The sky starts sulking by mid-afternoon. And you, seasoned creature of mud and habit, begin your annual ritual of preparing to freeze. Because collecting leeches in the fall is like trying to sunbathe during a snowball fight. Unwise, unpleasant, and full of regrets. But you can't afford to stop. The demand doesn't end just because the air's taken on the personality of a disapproving ant. The marsh changes its mood. It's quieter now. Still. Even the wind sounds bored. You step into the water and it bites. Not literally, although the leeches still try, but with cold. Not the kind that makes you shiver. The kind that settles into your bones, makes your teeth feel loose, and convinces you that your toes are imaginary. But still, you wade in, because in colder months, the good ones are harder to find. They sink deeper, sleepier, slower. You have to coax them, almost, stand still longer, stir the weeds with gentler movements. Some collectors give up entirely once October rolls in, but not you. You've got blankets to buy, salted meat to afford, one half decent coat hanging by a thread that absolutely cannot face another frost without backup. You're not brave, just persistent, like a cold sore with boots. One morning, while navigating through a patch of icy ankle deep sludge, you spot something rare, a mother leech nest, a gelatinous blob clinging to a submerged reed. Inside, tiny leechlings pulse like living commas. You pause, fascinated and slightly disturbed. Quirky tidbit: leeches are hermaphrodites, and many lay cocoons full of baby leeches that can survive astonishingly harsh conditions. Some hatch weeks later. Others survive winter frozen in stasis, like little vampiric snow peas. Historians still argue how collectors treated hatchlings, whether they nurtured them carefully or scooped them up with everything else. You opt for gentle scooping, mostly out of morbid curiosity. You collect a few, carefully, delicately. The small ones won't sell now, but next spring they'll be prime stock. Back at home, you begin setting up your winter tin. You add water warmed by the hearth, a bit of rotting leaf for comfort, and let the babies wriggle in their new jar like confused punctuation marks. You place the jar near the window, where light still spills in for at least 2 hours a day before darkness claims everything like an impatient landlord. You're not a nurturer by nature, but something about these tiny, squirming things makes you pause. Maybe it's because they remind you of yourself. Small, resilient, unlikely, and somehow still wriggling despite every possible inconvenience. As the cold deepens, you adjust. Layer up. Wrap extra cloth around your legs. Replace the moss in your clogs with something less soggy. You drink stronger tea. Eat more soup. You even try a batch of broth from a recipe the healer gave you. It tastes like sadness, but warms the stomach. You visit the marsh. Less often, but you go deeper, stay longer, plan more. The townsfolk begin coming to you. It starts with a knock from the healer's apprentice. A case of earaches. Needs something especially clingy. Then a man from the coast, heard about your stock, wants to buy in bulk. You make a deal. He leaves with a bucket, and you with a week's worth of meat, and the unsettling realization that you might actually be a small business now. You keep records, scratched into a board, barely legible, but clear enough for you to remember who owes what. You mark your jars by size, hunger, and bite speed. You start referring to individual leeches by names, not for emotional reasons, just practical ones. Mostly, Agnes is a fast feeder. Ruth clings too long, wobbly, once escaped the jar, bit your ankle mid-lunch, and got promoted. You begin to realize something strange. You don't just do this anymore. You know this. You've become an expert, a practitioner of a squishy, unpleasant, invaluable art. You've learned how to coax a leech into biting a fevered child, just enough, but not too much. You've learned to recognize when one is too sluggish, too bloated, too distracted by your body heat. You know how to retire a leech gently. You even know how to sneak one into a stubborn doctor's satchel with a note that says, "Try this before bleeding the poor boy out." And once, just once, the doctor sent back a coin with the word "thanks" etched into it. You kept it. It lives in your tin, among the squelches and the soft dark. A reminder that what you do, though unglamorous, unpopular, and occasionally disgusting, matters. Winter's coming. You don't welcome it exactly, but this year, you're ready. The first frost hits like a drunk uncle, sudden, uninvited, and way too aggressive. You wake to find your window rimmed in ice, and your breath fogging the air like a suspicious spirit. The tin, left a little too close to the sill, is crusted over at the edges. Inside, your best leeches float sluggishly, like they're questioning every decision that led them to this moment. You scramble, warm water, gentle stirring, a prayer to whatever bog deity watches over your tiny, blood sucking stockpile. Most survive. A few don't. You whisper their names, Agnes, Wobbly, Ruth, and tip their limp forms into the garden with quiet respect. Because yes, you've reached the point where you mourn leeches. There are fewer trips to the marsh now. Each one becomes a military operation of timing, layering, and calculated exposure. You wrap your legs with wool, your feet with oiled cloth, and your tin in an old potato sack, like it's a baby. A cold, squirming, frequently escape prone baby. The ground crunches underfoot. Ice creeps along the puddles. The leeches are harder to find, less eager, more strategic. They cling to the bottoms of reeds, nestled in the muck like tiny swamp misers hoarding warmth. Still, you manage, because this is what you do. You adapt. One morning, you return with only 3 leeches, all small, all unimpressed by your shivering. You feel the weight of it, the season pressing down on your shoulders like wet laundry, the creeping fear that maybe this year, winter, will win. Then the knock comes, not from the healer, not from the apothecary, from a stranger, well dressed, dry boots, gloves that cost more than your entire monthly earnings. He introduces himself as Mr. Crenshaw, on behalf of a gentleman in London with a particular interest in medicinal procurement. You nod politely, while quietly noting his shoes don't have a speck of mud on them. Suspicious. He says he's heard of you. Says your leeches have a reputation. Says you're rather consistent. You blink. Thanks? He offers a deal. Regular supply. Fixed rates. Shipped to the city in sealed jars. Better pay. Less walking. It sounds frankly wild. You nod slowly, then say the most practical thing that comes to mind. You'll have to pay up front. Shipping's expensive. He smiles. Of course, quirky tidbit. As medical practices expanded, in the late 1700s, demand for leeches in urban centers skyrocketed. Some rural collectors became unofficial suppliers for entire cities. Historians still argue whether these arrangements empowered collectors or just turned them into unpaid logistics officers for the upper class. Still, you take the deal, because while the bog is your temple, your tormentor, and occasionally your friend, your knees aren't getting younger, and your appetite for freezing your organs off in January is fading. You pack your best leeches into glass jars padded with cloth and send them off in a wooden crate marked fragile. Contents alive and hungry. You don't include a note. You don't need to. The coins arrive a week later, more than expected. Enough to buy a new cloak, a real one with lining. Enough for meat more than once a week. Enough to fix the leak in your roof or pay someone else to fix it. You do both. And for the first time in a long while, you sit by the fire in a house that doesn't drip, wearing socks without holes, sipping something warm that wasn't boiled 3 times to kill pond water ghosts. You stretch your legs. Fewer bites, fewer scabs, more space in your day to breathe and think and maybe plan. Because whether you like it or not, this job is changing. You're not just a collector anymore. You're a supplier, a business. A name? You never asked for that. You never dreamed of it. But it's happened. You built a life from the mud. Not clean, not easy, but real. And now others are beginning to notice. You stand, walk to the window, and peer out into the frost dusted marsh. It waits, quiet and patient. You smile softly. Don't worry, you whisper. I'm not done with you yet. You make one final trip before the deepest freeze sets in. The marsh is still, silent. Every blade of grass crusted in frost, every puddle glazed with ice so thin it shatters beneath your steps like spun sugar. The air bites at your face. Your breath trails behind you like a ghost trying to catch up. And yet, there's a strange peace in it. The bog, in its frozen form, feels less like a battlefield and more like a cathedral. Sacred, untouched, quiet enough that your thoughts echo. You pause on the edge of the water, boot crunching into the icy bank, and listen. No frogs, no birds, no distant shouts, just wind and memory. You step in. The water stings like nettles, sharp and electric against your skin. You hiss through your teeth and keep going. Slowly, deliberately. You move to your old favorite spot, the one near the twisted alder tree that always seemed to yield the most spirited specimens. You stand there, letting the cold soak into your bones and wait. No thoughts, no complaints, just patience. And then you feel it, the tiniest tug on your calf. A leech, still here, still working, just like you. You reach down, gently peel it off, and slip it into your jar. Then another. Then one more, smaller but tenacious. 3 leeches. That's enough. You leave behind a fourth that clings too long, too slow. Let it rest. Let it hibernate. You walk home with a lighter step than you expected. At the door, you pause. Turn back. Look out at the bog one more time. And in that moment, you don't see muck and blood and frostbitten toes. You see every moment that shaped you. The first bite, the first coin, the bad days, the near fevers, the forgotten lunches, the days when the tin was empty and your belly too. You see every face that came to your door. Healers, beggars, strangers with rich gloves and poor manners. You see the leeches, hundreds of them, each a little testament to your endurance, your precision, your refusal to give up. You see yourself not just a leech collector, a keeper of something older than medicine, something stranger than science, something that demanded your body, your humor, your grit, and got all 3. Back inside, you hang your cloak, stoke the fire, and lower yourself into the chair by the hearth. You stretch out your legs, freshly wrapped and mostly healed, and exhale. The tin sits by the fire, warmed, alive, and for once, completely silent. The wind rattles the shutters, but inside, peace. You made it through the year. Again, you lean back, stare at the ceiling beams, and let yourself imagine spring. Not because it's coming soon, but because you know you'll be ready for it when it does. You always are. You always have been. You close your eyes. And now, the tin is closed. The boots are off. The water has stilled. And the marsh, with all its squelch and suck and silence, fades slowly into the hush of night. You sit by the fire, the flames casting long, sleepy shadows on the wall, dancing across old floorboards and calloused hands. Outside, the wind softens into something gentler, like a whisper under the door, reminding you that time stretches long and slow in this part of the world. Your body finally begins to loosen. The ache in your legs eases. The chill in your bones surrenders to warmth. And all the voices, the townsfolk, the doctors, the skeptics, the frogs, grow quieter, like someone slowly dimming the day with careful hands. You did your job. You endured the bites, the cold, the muck. You fed families, helped strangers, healed wounds you never saw, and you kept going. With a tin in your hand and your feet in the mud, you built something no one else dared to try. So let yourself drift now. Let the damp and noise of the marsh become soft background hum. Let the weight slide off your shoulders like wet cloth dropped by the fire. The night is still. The leeches are sleeping. And you've earned your rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.